Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be talking about a subject that I've been wanting to make a video on for a very long time now. I've gotten tempted a few times. There's been certain things that have definitely gotten me more and more tempted, but I'm kind of happy that I took so long to make said topic as I am now calm, cool, and collected. I'm no longer angry about said topics, but I do want to bring them up as I love this game. I've been playing this game a lot. As you can tell, I've invested a lot of time into it. So, of course, I care about the health of the game and the health of the game going forward. So, there are a few things that I've noticed that definitely detract from the game's quality. There are certain things that the devs do, there are certain things that the game has problems with that I want to bring up that I don't know if they know, but it's more of just a conversational point between me and my audience here. So we're going to start off with the first one. The first thing that we are going to be talking about is my worries about trade. So recently, if you did not know, uh, EHG decided that they didn't want trade in Last Epoch because they believed that it was too hard to implement, too annoying to implement, right? It took too much effort because they want a setup that is not able to be abused very hard. They also want you to be able to find said items instead of having to trade on the market for said items. But I think that this was kind of a flawed perspective as when people play ARPGs and stuff, specifically in multiplayer, that's really the status quo per se is trade. I don't mind trade. I don't need trade to play my builds. I can play my builds and get my gear anyways, but there are a lot of people that want trade, and a large majority of the audience that plays Last Epoch or will play Last Epoch in the future definitely want trade as well, as they found out when they made their post about trade not coming, or at least in the foreseeable future, as they didn't really want to have it in their game. Now, what happened was a bit right after this post, they had to essentially scramble and they had to make a new version of trade, or at least in my opinion, that's what it seems like it was, where they weren't really planning on it, but then they had to fix it because there was a lot of negative view around, of course, Last Epoch. And Last Epoch was heralded as the game that was made by its community. And if its community wants trade, then it should probably get trade, right? So that's essentially what happened. Now, this has caused a few problems. The first thing is, of course, the timing of when we're getting trade. So if you don't know, right now it is September. Uh, the Runes of Power patch is coming out in a few days from the recording of this video, and we're not getting any amount of trade in it. Like we're not getting trade in general. Now, problem is they've decided that they want to release Last Epoch. They want to bring Last Epoch to 1.0 this year. Now, there are a few problems with this. The first thing being off is I think this is a little bit of a hasty decision bringing Last Epoch to 1.0, as I don't believe it's ready yet. I think there's a lot of stuff that they could work on that definitely needs to be addressed. And trade, of course, is one of them, as I'll be honest, you only get one chance at releasing your game. It's like something Chris Wilson said one time, I believe. Like you only get one chance at releasing your game. You only get one chance at 1.0, right? So if they mess up bad, then we'll have a Wilson situation all over again. Now, of course, I don't believe Last Epoch will be like Wilson. I think even if trade messed up for some reason, I think the game would still be solid, but I definitely don't want the game to be ragged on because of a misstep on the developer's part, right? So the biggest problem here is we're not going to be able to test trade before 1.0, right? So if trade comes at 1.0 or later at 1.0, right, we're not going to have the ability to test it on a large scale before 1.0. Now, of course, it's like, oh, we got people working in the CT, we got people working on this, we got people working on that, we have people testing trade for you. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be honest. I don't think you can really test trade in a closed environment like a beta testing environment, because no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, there will be things that will slip through the cracks that can only be found after large amounts of people are utilizing your product. And this is the case with PoE. Pee-wee has this problem all the time where things that are tested in a closed environment aren't necessarily things that they find in an open environment, right? There's been a lot of stuff where, like, they haven't really been able to find it and fix it until there was in an open environment, and I believe that the hasty decision of bringing trade to 1.0 is not necessarily a good idea. I think, like, there should be a patch beforehand that brings trade in a very small capacity, at the very least, where we can test it beforehand and not just a closed group of individuals with biased opinions. I believe it should be the whole community as a whole, because if they want to keep this moniker of, oh, we are a community made game, I would probably suggest having your community assist you with these decisions. Now, another thing that I have a problem with is, I think with trade coming in 1.0 and all this and all that, I think part of the problem with the game is there's a lot of people that will say, "Oh, I don't want to play Last Epoch until 1.0. I don't want to play Last Epoch till 1.0. I don't want to play it till it's out of early access, all this, all that." And because of this mentality that a lot of people have, it has caused the developers to push their hand and to bring the game to 1.0 quicker, which is, I don't think, is a good idea at all. This is kind of with the trade argument as well. I think they are trying to get rid of the early access tag, even if I don't believe the game is worthy of removing the early access tag. I don't think many people would agree with me there. I think there's a lot of things that could be fixed that aren't really being addressed right now. So I think overall, uh, I think that the devs are just trying to get rid of the early access tag so that, of course, more people play the game. And while that is a good thing, I don't think that will be a good thing in the long run, because it will cause people to have very bad opinions about the game. Because right now, there are problems with the game. Even if they manage to fix half of them, there will still be even more problems. So, the next thing that I want to be talking about is, of course, the balance of the game. I keep talking about it. What are my problems with it? Well, the most recent example of this is the current debate around Rune Master and Sorcerer right now. So essentially, EHG is adding the last mastery for Mage, Rune Master, right? And essentially, it is, and by all means, a better sorcerer in every single aspect, right? So in card games, usually, to push sales and stuff like that, right? They would make cards that are better than the last in the cycle, right? So that, of course, they could push sales. Everyone knows this. This is common practice, and everyone is used to this in card games. But in an ARPG, it's not as much of a practice. Like, it's a small taste here or there, but generally, I found RPGs with good balance are usually regarded as good RPGs. What a thought, right? And I don't think just releasing a whole entire mastery that essentially replaces the old mastery is a good idea. I think it causes a few issues and it causes them problems down the line. EHG has been notorious for this, where they will make a problem and they will have a problem, and then instead of fixing the problem, they will just waylay the problem. Like, for instance, Rune Master is essentially the sorcerer rework that we should have gotten, right? Like, everything that Rune Master is what Sorcerer should have been. And of course, Rune Master should have been its own thing. But now we have Rune Master now, which is essentially just Sorcerer, just as a better form of it and a better overall form of it. Like, they've done a really good job on on Rune Master. And now it's like, well, 1.0 is going to be coming on later this year, right? They don't really have the time to rework the entirety of Sorcerer while also working on everything else in the game. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a few other masteries as well that kind of need help. Like, for instance, Shaman needs a lot of help as well. It's been in the dumps for a long time now, and it's another mastery that needs to be reworked. There's a lot of skills that need to be reworked, like Acid Flask. I think Dancing Strikes is in a very poor spot right now. I think Surf and Strike, after the rework, is in a terrible spot. The problem is they keep giving themselves more and more work to do in the future by making very poor decisions in the present. Or, why am I playing this? Why am I playing that? Why would I ever specialize Acid Flask as a game that prides itself on, of course, the skills and the skill diversity and all that? I don't think it's really a good idea to have this kind of stuff in the place of the game. you know? And we could talk about, Surf and Strike all day. We could talk about Forge Guard all day. We could talk about all of these different balancing problems all day. But in the end, it really depends on what EHG is able to handle and what they want to do. And the problem is if they're releasing 1.0 this year, they don't really have time to work on all these things. And if they don't see these things as problems, that's fine. But I think these are things that are going to come back and bite them in the butt in the future because these are the things that people who play the game for long enough figure out and understand and have problems with. Another part of this problem is, of course, the mana situation and its current problems. So, like for instance, EHG has a few problems when it comes to just mana in general. Whenever anyone plays the game, they have a large issue with their mana system, and that is because it is innately flawed in a few ways. Mainly, the biggest problem is skills that cost mana do not do effects that merit said mana cost. What do I mean by that? Well, a good example is, of course, the three big slams in, of course, Sentinel. These are Erasing Strike, Judgment, and Forge Strike. Recently, with the Judgment rework and stuff, Judgment has gotten significantly better since it used to be, but it still has its problems, right? Erasing Strike recently just got nerfed for absolutely no reason. It does significantly less damage now, which is a very sad thing to see. And of course, Forge Strike. Forge Strike is like that weird kid in school that like eats paint, right? And what am I saying here? Well, when I press a button and it consumes all of my mana, I kind of expect it to do something. Like if it needs to either one, do a lot of damage, or two, kill a lot of monsters in a large area. If I'm spending a lot of mana on something, it needs to be doing something. And the problem is, a lot of the skills that cost a lot of mana don't do a lot, right? Like, for instance, aforementioned Forge Strike. It does not do enough damage for its mana cost. Erasing Strike, it does not do enough damage for its mana cost. Judgment, it doesn't have enough big enough AoE to merit its mana cost, but it does plenty of damage, right? And then there are other skills, like for instance, Meteor. Meteor does not deal anywhere near amount enough damage to merit its mana cost. It has probably some of the largest amounts of mana cost in the entire game, and it does diddly squat. My channeled Wandering Spirit setup, as you can see on the screen right now, does more damage than any Meteor setup could ever do, and that is because, of course, Meteor just has a very poor tree currently and doesn't really have that much synergy with the rest of Mage, right? And there's also another problem with mana, right? When it comes to the mana generator spender ideology. So, for instance, right now, it seems like as though they want us to use a big mana spender, right? Like a Racing Strike, let's say, right? And then they want us to use a skill like Rive to generate mana to be able to spam a Racing Strike. Now, normally, this is a cool idea. I kind of like it. It's a cool idea. But in practice, it is god awful. It is because the skills that generate the mana, i.e., like Rive or Smite or whatever, end up just generically being better skills than the skills that you're supposed to be spamming them with, right? Which is very unfortunate, right? Like, for instance, Lightning Blast, or of course, Fireball in this case, is the skill that you would use to gain mana to spam your meteors, right? But the problem is, you're much better off as using Meteor as a utility and not scaling its damage and just using Fireball to deal your damage. Static Orb, it's in the same boat. You can use Static Orb to clear though. Static Orb is a lot better. I think it's like the premier skill of something that does what it's supposed to do for its mana cost. So we won't talk about that. But another situation is Earthquake. I don't think Earthquake does enough for its mana cost specifically. Most of the best Earthquake builds have been essentially ignoring Earthquake's mana cost. So I think that's a very bad idea. I think that's a big problem. I think mana overall is something that should be just be reworked, or they need to figure out how to make skills do effects based on their mana cost instead of just giving a big mana cost on a skill because why not? So the next thing that we're going to be talking about is, of course, meaningful endgame in Last Epoch. So currently, there are a few problems with endgame. The first thing being off objective rushing. So if you don't know what objective rushing is, currently in Last Epoch, in the current endgame system of the Monolith of Fate, there are nodes inside the tree that will give you certain rewards. So, like for instance, there's nodes that give you exalted rings, for example. You do the monolith, you finish the objective, you get a bunch of exalted rings. You do this, you do that, you get this said reward. Now, currently, the problem is these rewards right now are our main source of gear. So, for instance, I'm looking for a bunch of exalted rings. I'll go to exalted ring nodes, yada, yada, yada. This is the largest source of just generic gear. If we want to farm for an LP legendary, we'll go to the monolith and farm that specific, timeline and try to get that legendary, stuff like that, right? This is where most of our gear comes from. There are a few other ways of getting gear, but this is our main source. And this is the main endgame loop, right? So this causes a few problems. The main one is these nodes, when you go and get them and you finish the monolith, they don't scale off of the monolith itself. So, like for instance, you could be spending 5 hours in the same monolith or 5 minutes, and the node that you grab at the end, the exalted ring node or whatever, it will give you the same amount of exalted rings, or it will give you the same level of rarity of unique, right? So, causes a few problems in the game, mainly because it makes it so that when you're killing enemies in the monolith right now, currently, you are not really incentivized to kill said enemies. If they are not the enemies of the objective that you have to kill, then you need to speed past it. You need to essentially get to the objective as fast as possible because, in general, that is the most efficient way of playing the game. And sadly, due to the way that ARPG gamers are, we look for the most efficient way to play. This is not a problem that will inflict new players. People who play for a day aren't going to feel this. It's the people who stick with the game and keep playing with it. And generally, these are the people that will essentially keep your game alive, right? And the problem is if this problem isn't fixed eventually, then a lot of people are going to come out and say, my Epoch's endgame is kind of boring. And a lot of people bring that up already. Everyone that's like played the game for enough time have realized that like the end game definitely needs a little bit of a tune up. And hopefully we do get that tune up. I believe that we are getting some kind of tune up, but recently, like some of the things that they've been adding hasn't really affected it much at all, right? So, like for instance, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, the exiled mage fixes objective rushing or whatever," and it really doesn't. That's because, like, I'll be honest, like you kind of do the same exact kind of thought process for the exiled mage as you do for objective rushing. It's just a little different. So instead of rushing the objective, right, to finish the monolith, now you just rush around and try to look for the exiled mage while you're rushing for said objective. So it still benefits you stacking large amounts of cooldown recovery speed for your travel skills, and it still benefits you for stacking large amounts of movement speed currently. And thanks to the lack of scaling that corruption has, this means that going higher in the monolith, like going higher in corruption, isn't all that rewarding for most of the time, which means that you aren't incentivized to kill monsters. Last Epoch is the first game that I've played that is an ARPG that does not incentivize you to directly kill monsters. There are certain monsters you got to kill to get through objectives and stuff like that, but it definitely doesn't incentivize you to actually go out and kill as many monsters as possible. This is mainly due to the fact that the monolith web, there's no like map system like there is in PoE. PoE has a different way of dealing with this problem because if you don't kill the entire map, you don't get your map for the next map. So like if you don't kill enough, you end up actually running out of maps and it screws you over in the end, right? Because you can't progress if you don't kill enough, right? So you need to kill everything in the map, otherwise you won't progress. With Last Epoch, thanks to the way that it is balanced, Uh, you don't have to kill anything to progress. You just need to kill the specific objectives that are marked, right? The boss, the gate, the arena enemies. So this means that you are incentivized to kill as little as possible that aren't your objective. So it's kind of eh. And this is mainly caused by the fact that the monsters in the monolith, they really don't drop anything. Like, don't get me wrong, you'll see like a random exalted item here or there. Rarity is cool and all. Like, it sometimes works, but sometimes it doesn't work, especially with like, you know, my loot filter. But I've had on every single loot filter, I show every single exalted item, right? So the amount of exalted items that I see whenever I have my rarity juiced up, I don't really see many exalted items even early on. Now, I've seen some clips of people going to higher corruptions and scaling really hard on item rarity, but I don't really think it's worth the effort, technically, because there are better ways of getting exalted items. Like there's the T4 Jurla dungeon door rushing, which is the same kind of mentality as the current objective rushing, except you kill an entire floor in Fire Bastion, which is very mediocre and has its own set of problems. And then, of course, you have the lightless arbor, which is its own problems because of just how gold is and how random the drops are. So this leads to just endgame feeling bland. Hopefully, they manage to fix this in the future. It's something I really hope that they fix in the future. I've actually brought this up to the developers a few times, but overall, I hope it's something that gets fixed in the future because I would like there to actually be endgame to do with. All right, that's going to be it for the things that I don't necessarily like about Last Epoch right now. I didn't want this video to be too negative. I wanted to be level headed and just a conversational video. I don't think that if any of these things aren't addressed, the game will do bad. I think the game will still do fine anyways, but I think the game could do significantly better if it addressed some of these things. So, with all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go do something else. Bye.